Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Mark Swan, and I hope you are having a weird and wonderful week. I know I am. As of the time of this recording, it is May 9th, 2021, which means it is Mother's Day. And I called my mom. I was a good boy. I remembered this time. I have a bad habit of forgetting to call her, so I made sure to make a note of it. And I know she listens because she likes to send me notes when she listens to the latest episode. So, Mom, hi, I love you. Thank you so much for listening. We are having just a wonderful week of weather here in Colorado. It is either blazingly hot or winter cold, depending on the day. And as a result, I get a little bit fatigued when there are rapid temperature changes. So I do apologize if I come off as a little sick. That's why. And speaking of the changing weather, one of my favorite things about these seasons switching over to spring and summer is to see all the wildlife come back. There is a park next to my apartment complex with a lake, and I am really excited to report that my favorite flock of geese have returned. I didn't think this was going to happen. And before you ask, the reason they are my favorite flock of geese is because they seem to be like a group of misfits. Most notably, it is a flock of Canadian geese that has one brown goose. It is an entirely different type of goose. I think I've only ever seen this type of goose like on farms. It's the ones that you get eggs from. I don't know. I feel like it's the one that shows up in Charlotte's Web or like Babe Pig in the City. But for whatever reason, it took to this flock of geese and they accepted it. And we found them, my partner and I found them last year. And we were really always excited to see this goose. We called her Bella Lugosi. And she left. We just didn't think that she was going to return, but they came back to the exact same place. The other goose in this flock that makes them misfits is a Canadian goose who I swore was going to be dead by now. Its wing was basically skeletal. It had been attacked by a coyote or a hawk or something, and I was like, that goose isn't going to live much longer. But it's back. Its wing is still skeletal, and it's still nasty, but it somehow flew with its flock. I have no idea. I'm just really excited to see those geese again. Small wonders in this post-COVID world. Well, hey, we have a really, really great show for you today. I've got 4 exciting segments for your weird listening pleasure. We're going to start off today with news from China, where a Russian worker got himself into kind of a pickle where he agreed to be on a sort of American Idol talent reality TV show. And things did not go for him like expected. We'll get to that in a second. After that, we're talking about Ken Allen, the infamous orangutan who kept, I love this, he kept sneaking out of his enclosure in the San Diego Zoo. Zoo staff was not able to figure out how he was doing it or able to prevent it, and we will get into that story in a little bit. After that, we are going through a couple strange ways that modern researchers are using unusual tools to detect illnesses. We have an AI that was designed to identify pastries, and they are using it to instead identify cancer cells. And we'll do a quick story about how scientists are using bees to identify COVID-19 patients. And to round off the episode, I am going to go, in honor of Mother's Day, my top 5 amazing moms. I scoured the internet for some great mom stories in honor of the holiday, and even though this episode is coming out after Mother's Day, hopefully you can honor your mom and all great moms out there with me with this segment. So let's hop right into it. Reality TV is a cultural phenomenon that has hit the entire world in the past 20 or so years. I would say my first interaction with reality TV would probably be The Real World on MTV when I was less than 10, I want to say. I've never really been a big fan of it, but I have caught on to the hype of a couple shows. I remember watching the first seasons of Survivor and Big Brother with my family. We would talk about those shows all week and would just love watching new episodes. For some reason, we as people have a sort of obsession with the lives of other normal people, and nothing has been able to catalog it better than reality TV. And of course, you can't talk about reality TV without talking about music reality TV with shows like American Idol or The Voice or etc., etc. And this is not an American-only thing. There are, of course, music reality TV shows in countries all over the world. And today's story takes us to China, where a contestant regretted participating after fans refused to vote him off. Vladislav Ivanov, a 27-year-old man from Vladivostok, Russia, was working on the Chinese boy band competition Produce Camp as a Russian translator when producers noticed his good looks and asked if he would like to be a contestant. Ivanov agreed to the change in profession, thinking he could make some extra money and perhaps get a little bit of attention, but quickly started having second thoughts. Produce Camp is one of those shows in which contestants battle against each other using their singing talents in order to eventually form an 11-piece world-touring boy band. Ivanov joined thinking that he hadn't a chance. However, fans of the show ended up really liking him and voting to keep him on. The funny business very quickly soured in Ivanov's eyes as he realized it would be a very real possibility that he would be contractually obligated to stay in this boy band without paying a very hefty fee. Ivanov, a part-time model, thought that the move might be good for his career, but once he realized the strict measures of the contracts he was signing, he realized that he could be putting himself into a situation that would essentially trap him in China for the foreseeable future. The Russian model and the other contestants were subjected to over 3 months of competition in which they had to do strenuous work for over 10 episodes, as well as numerous digital content spots. They also were held in strict living conditions where their phones were apparently confiscated and they had little contact with the outside world aside from press. So what does our boy Ivanov do once he realized he may have messed up and got himself into a predicament? Well, he started performing poorly on purpose. Going by the stage name Lelouch, Ivanov kicked off his campaign with a rendition of a Russian rap. I'm actually going to bring it up here so we can listen to a little bit. Okay, so I definitely encourage you to look up this video of his first performance on YouTube. It does exist. It's called Lelouch, Lelush. That is his stage name. And the name of the song translated is Jackpot. And he looks downright miserable. He is not having a good time. He doesn't want to be there. But the crowd is eating it up. They're loving it. And unfortunately for our wholesome hero, he was such a popular contestant that the audience, the judges, and all of China were voting to keep him on the show. Lelouch was a hit, much to the chagrin of Ivanov. Viewers continued to vote for the contestant as they actually loved his poor attitude. Fans expressed that his defeatist attitude was iconic of Chinese millennial culture. Meanwhile, Ivanov did not keep his distaste for the competition a secret. He went on record saying things on episodes such as, "I hope the judges won't support me. I hope I get an F while the other contestants get A's." He urged viewers to not love him and that he will not bring them results, and he would repeatedly plead the viewing audience to not vote for him, saying things like, "Please don't make me go to the finals. I'm tired." The viewers, however, did not listen, and Ivanov was eventually voted to the finals, where he ate a lemon on camera and said, "Please do not support me again. I'm not kidding." Russian news media originally reported on the contestants' predicament in a joking manner. However, as Ivanov became more and more desperate, Russian news started to take sympathy, and there were several social media and professional press campaigns to get Ivan to return home, calling him a captive and a prisoner to this Chinese television show. In a case of a straight-up culture war, social media from Russia just wanted Ivanov to come home, while social media in China demanded that he stay. The story, of course, has a happy ending, if that's what you want to call it, as Ivanov was voted from the show in the final round, and he couldn't be more happy. The recently defeated contestant apparently went to social media and said, "I'm finally getting off work." The upset apparently erupted all throughout China as a hashtag dedicated to his departure was viewed more than 180 million times and reposted more than 59,000 times. Russia was happy to report of their boy's freedom, with the Russian embassy saying to Ivanov, "Congrats, have a good rest." Well, that's sweet. There were rumors that Ivanov was going to stay in China after the competition and be a model, which probably would have made him very successful considering, but he left Beijing as quickly as he could. The whole weird ordeal did wondrous things for Produce Camp, as the talent show saw a massive increase of viewership and international attention. Critics were quick to suggest that Ivanov's weird run was nothing more than a publicity stunt, but the model has gone to say that this is not the case, and that he actually really hated being on camera. Well, why'd you do it, dude? Sir, it doesn't matter where you're from. Certainly you have to understand that being part of a reality TV show is no walk in the park. And if you go on a show and deliberately make yourself unappealing, people are going to catch on to that, and they probably are just going to vote for you and keep you experiencing a bad time just out of spite. That's just how people are. In fact, reports on social media suggest that there were voters out there who were keeping Lelouch on the show for that very reason, just to mess with him, just to keep him sad and miserable. People suck, man, and especially when there's that nice little barrier of TV glass between you and your audience. People tend not to treat each other like real people if there's something to suggest that what they're watching isn't genuine or isn't real, or sometimes maybe even it is. The whole thing about anonymity from something like a online or viewer-based voting program is that people will act upon really mean impulses. So if you're going on a show as like a goof or something, and then you realize you don't want to be a part of it, first of all, always have someone who is adequate at reading contracts look over your service contract, because that's kind of where they get you, you know? It's not an easy thing to get out of a show business contract, and especially one, I have to assume, from a strict country like China. So if there's even a hint that a show business contract is going to make you a captive for possibly years of performing, I don't know, don't even give yourself the possibility. That's my hindsight advice to you, Lelouch, but I am glad you got what you wanted, and perhaps you'll learn to understand the legality of things a little bit better in the future. I don't know. Maybe somebody handed him the contract and he just didn't even bother reading it, or he didn't understand it. It was in another language. After all, I would have to assume. I'm just making lots of assumptions here. But regardless, I really suggest anybody listening who gets put into a similar situation, just walk away if you can. I mean, who wants to be in a boy band in 2021 anyway? I don't really want anybody to answer that question. But if you want to be in a boy band in 2021, go ahead and find me on social media and tell me so. I guess people like you exist. That's why shows like Produce Camp exist, I guess, because there is a certain type of person that wants to be a star by any means necessary. I do think it's funny that reality TV and boy bands go hand in hand. Going back to MTV, I'm just thinking about how the Real World and those sort of proto-reality competitions, or I don't even know if you'd call it a competition. Regardless, that sort of proto-reality TV show was getting big right around the time of bands like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and 98 Degrees. And I'm going to be real with you. I did listen to and like those bands, and I did not tell a soul. I probably should have been more proud of it. Anyway, when we come back, I am going to recount to you the wonderful tale of Ken Allen, an orangutan with an incredible talent for escaping his enclosure. And at the end of the show, I am giving you my very special Mother's Day top 5 awesome moms. This is the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Mark Swan, and did you know we were part of a podcast network? I'm guessing if you listened to me before, you have probably heard my whole spiel, but here it goes again. GSMC hosts a wide array of interesting and varied podcasts. There's a podcast for cars, there's a podcast for music, there's a podcast for entertainment, for engineering, all kinds of things. And if you like the weird news one with me and my teammates, we post several times a week. You may want to check out some of the other GSMC podcasts. It helps us out every single time you do. And you might just find a topic that you love listening to. But I sure do hope you stay with me, because weird news is definitely my favorite thing. And I will be talking about weird news until I die. If you can't tell, it's something I'm quite passionate about. Also, if you haven't, please find the GSMC Weird News Podcast on social media. I take to Twitter every day with new weird topics and questions. And hey, if you want to be mentioned on the podcast, engage with me, find one of my questions, answer it. I might use your answer on the podcast, and I'll say you by name, or I'll use your screen name, depending on what's available to me. Before the break, we were cheering on the almost captive pop star Lelouch as he escaped his prison of Chinese boy band competitions to return to his motherland of Russia. Congrats to you, Lelouch. I know you're a big fan of this show. And speaking of great escapes, our next story takes us back to the year 1985, to the San Diego Zoo, where a mischievous Bornean orangutan named Ken Allen was making escapes of his own. According to the San Diego Zoo website, Ken Allen, and I am going to stop for a moment just to comment on how absurd a name Ken Allen is for an orangutan. But regardless, Ken was raised in the Children's Zoo nursery, and he had a mischievous twinkle in his eye from the get-go. He was uncannily brilliant, with a knack for mechanics and pulling one over on his keepers. As a youngster, he unscrewed the nuts and removed the metal mesh top of his supposedly child-proof playpen so he could ramble around the nursery for the night. He would hop back in by morning after cleverly putting the playpen back together. He did this several times before his keepers caught him at it. Ken's propensity for escaping followed him into his adult years, and in 1985, first on June 13th, and then on July 29th and August 13th, Ken escaped his enclosure at the San Diego Zoo to walk around and look at the other animals. Ken wasn't in his game because he was unhappy, however. He really just liked to walk around the zoo, look at the other enclosures. According to San Diego Zoo, he was never violent, and it was more like a game to him, and he'd actually go back to his exhibit and wait for the zookeepers to let him back in. Of course, his keepers were stumped at first, having never seen multiple escapes like this before, and so they started to run surveillance on Ken. However, the ape understood that he was being watched and stopped trying to escape. This led to zookeepers going undercover and dressing in informal clothes like they were guests of the zoo so that they could watch discreetly. But this did not fool Ken either. Ken's antics were so perplexing that the zoo actually moved him to another pen temporarily and had mountain climbers come in and study every foothold within the enclosure to see how Ken was escaping. And how was Ken escaping? One of his methods involved a crowbar that zoo workers accidentally left in his cage that he was using to pry at a certain part of the caging so he could escape. How did they find this out? Well, because Ken took the crowbar and gave it to another orangutan to escape as well. So our boy Ken here is not only an escape artist, he is a philanthropist for all of ape kind. I am, of course, reminded of the orangutan in the newer Planet of the Apes movies. Is it Cornelius? I don't know. I'm not a big Planet of the Apes fan, but I too seem to remember the orangutan being named Cornelius and how he was kind of a comic relief for those movies. That's no correlation really other than both are orangutans and that both are apparently incredibly smart. Another method of Ken's madness involved him climbing the exterior wall like Spider-Man. And yet another time involved the moat of his enclosure drying up without anybody's knowledge and him simply walking across the dry area to escape. Ken's escape act persisted for years, over several successful attempts for the ape to free himself and walk around the zoo. And his story was so incredible that he became somewhat of a folk hero around San Diego, even inspired a fan club, and his escapes were not taken poorly by the zoo and were actually used as a selling point for tickets. San Diego Zoo even began printing t-shirts and bumper stickers that said "Free Ken Allen." The orangutan even got a song written by him by Dennis Gersten, and it was played on local radio stations where it became a hit. Still, it was potentially dangerous to have an ape walking around the zoo on his own fruition, so various tactics were used to keep Ken in his pen, working to varying degrees of success. Their attempts ranged from installing electric fencing to deter the orangutan from climbing, to putting female orangutans in Ken's pen to keep him distracted. Such distractions didn't work, however, and Ken actually taught his mates to escape with him. Throughout his life, Ken escaped 9 times and was known for taking pictures with zoo patrons. I really like that. I want to see those pictures. Of course, according to Newsweek, that could all just be an urban legend. Ken did eventually calm down and resigned to staying in his pen with his friends and mates, although he then got a reputation for giving young children the finger. Unfortunately, our friend Ken is no longer with us. In the year 2000, he was diagnosed with B-cell lymphoma, and he passed away soon after. So, sad end to Ken. Ken lives on in the San Diego Zoo's memory. There's a whole webpage dedicated to him, and he has a memorial installed around the orangutan enclosure in his honor. I love this story. I love when animals prove smarter than our assumptions, and I think we all knew that orangutans were a smart ape anyway, but the idea of an orangutan who is too smart for his own good and repeatedly breaking the law, it just warms the cockles of my heart. I love hearing something like that. For some reason, this story reminded me of last year when I heard how zoos were dealing with the loneliness in animals during the quarantines. Zoo staff had to keep the animals alive and entertained, obviously, but I guess certain animals were being affected by the idea that there were no patrons around to observe them, and they were dealing with their own bouts of depression and loneliness. And the way that the zoos handled that was to take them out of their enclosures and wander them around the rest of the zoo so they could all visit each other. And that's just so sweet. And there's obviously some sort of want to do that in the animal psyche because Ken decided that he would just do that on his own. So good for you, Ken. I hope you're up there in the monkey afterlife, just chilling, hopefully not having to escape from anything. Like, I just love that he was doing it since he was a baby. That's so cute. Well, Ken's story also inspired in me the curiosity of how often zoos deal with escape artist animals. And there are actually several instances of really brilliant animal escapees, and I'd like to share some of them with you now. Keeping it in the ape family, we have Evelyn the gorilla, who escaped the Los Angeles Zoo 4 or 5 times, one time jumping onto another gorilla's back to hop over the enclosure wall, and otherwise climbing the vines of the enclosure to pull herself out. Evelyn's escapes were even chronicled on the local news as television copters watched as the ape ran around the zoo. In 2011, a young African penguin named Leona waddled out of her enclosure in a German zoo and made her way into the lion's den. Luckily, the lions were sleeping, but Leona could have been in big trouble if they weren't. Even more luckier, Leona was happy to be urged on by some fish to return to her enclosure. Going all the way back to 1958, we have Cyril the sea lion, who escaped his small pool at the Storybook Garden Zoo in London, Ontario. He swam miles and miles until he ended up by a boathouse in Ohio. The Toledo Zoo took Cecil, and there was some litigation dealing with who got to keep the sea lion, and eventually he was returned back to the Storybook Zoo in Ontario, but not before Cyril having just a wonderful adventure of his own. Taking it back to the orangutans, we have Fu Manchu, who lived in the Omaha Zoo in the late 60s and was notorious for hiding wire under his lip, which he used to pick the locks of his gate. It says here that he was so skilled, he was even awarded an honorary membership to the American Association of Locksmiths. I guess sometimes you can't deny an animal's want or need to be free. And you certainly can't deny that animals are often smarter than we give them credit for. I mean, I am already amazed to hear that orangutans have used tools to escape their own confinement. But crows are another unusual example of animals learning to use tools. Numerous studies have shown that these birds can use certain provided tools to figure out complex puzzles. That's pretty cool. Believe it or not, pigs have also been observed using tools as well. And while we're talking about pigs actually have been observed using vocabulary, with different distinct oinks meaning different things, and pig mothers talk to their piglets and sing to them while they're nursing. Now, I've pulled up a video here because I want to hear what a pig singing to its piglets sounds like. Interesting. I suppose that could be pig singing if you really, really want it to be. I guess my point of today is that animals are smart, and I don't think we would have realized that animals were so smart without the advent of zoos. I know there are a lot of people who knock zoos, and I think they do so for very good reasons. Not every zoo is amazing, and there are zoos out there that probably could use some improvement as far as their standards go. However, a zoo is ultimately a good way to educate the public on what it means to be an animal in this world. I will always applaud zoos. I will always applaud their efforts on studying animals and keeping endangered species safe. I love zoos. I always have loved zoos. I love aquariums. I recently saw on my Facebook memory that 10 years ago, I visited my absolute favorite animal in any zoo ever, a alligator snapping turtle named Bob. The reason why I bring this up is because as I was finishing school last year, I did a news package on the passing of Bob the turtle. It was something that affected me personally, and Bob was a good one, man. I remember being maybe 5 or 6 and seeing Bob for the first time and being fascinated, and I got to see that turtle all the way to the end of his life. The only reason why I'm bringing it up now is because I cannot stress enough how good zoos are for the community. I absolutely encourage anybody out there to support their local zoo. I think I'm soapboxing at this point. I love zoo stories, man, and I love animals. Well, hey, you are listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, if you didn't get the memo, and I am Mark Swan. When we come back, artificial intelligence that can find cancer, bees that can find COVID. It is a weird, wonderful world in the modern science industry, and we have some researchers that are doing some cool things with some unusual tools. And we're going to be talking more about animals, because I love animals, and we're going to be talking about bees, which, if you didn't know, bees are my favorite thing. What's your favorite animal? Go ahead and tell me on social media. Once again, we are on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and be sure to check out some other GSMC podcasts. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Mark Swan, and I very recently was getting annoyed because I was doing one of those CAPTCHA tests where it has you look at 9 pictures. You have to click every picture that has a car in it, and you're going through and you're like, okay, well, is that a car? There's a motorcycle. Is a motorcycle a car? Well, that's a picture of a boat. Is a boat a car? And then you may not click one of the right pictures, or you might click something that you think is right or you don't know, and then it makes you do it again. And it's like, I just want to log in and order a burger, man. The reason I bring this up is because for a long time, I didn't realize what I was doing in using those CAPTCHA programs. And if you are not aware, the CAPTCHA image recognition mini game, or whatever you want to call it, is actually used in helping AI deep learning. And what do I mean by deep learning? Well, I am no scientist, nor am I an engineer, nor am I a computer programmer, but I will try my best to explain that a deep learning AI uses references to detect objects or data on an image. And where does it get those references? Why? By you clicking cars on CAPTCHAs. Every time you do one of those little I am not a robot tests, you are actually helping a machine algorithm learn a little bit harder what a car looks like, or what a streetlight looks like, or what a human face looks like. And why would you want to help this thing learn? Well, there's a number of reasons. Tesla's world famous self-driving cars use deep learning to better recognize things like traffic signals and other cars so it can better respond to scenarios in real time while they're driving. Social media sites like Facebook use deep AI learning to recognize people's faces to better help you tag pictures and organize your life. So when Facebook ever asks you, hey, is Dave Smith in this picture? And you go, Dave Smith is in this picture. How did you know? It's because it's using a very complex algorithm to recognize Dave. Now, of course, there's some conversation as to whether these methods are ethical or even desirable, but it just goes to show you how advanced our technology has become in only a few short years. Hisashi Kanbei and his company Brain Co. have been working out of Japan for the better part of 30 years to help machines learn by sight. In the early 2000s, Brain Co. was approached by a chain of restaurants that were branching out into a chain of bakeries. And this chain of bakeries had a unique problem. The company wanted to sell a wide variety of pastries and breads from all around the world, but they did not want to wrap these products as they found that customers didn't think they were as fresh if they came wrapped. If their products didn't have a wrapping, that meant you couldn't put a sticker with a barcode on the top. And what this meant was that employees had to manually enter the type of bread and its price at checkout. Why was this a problem? Because they had such a variety of products that employees were tasked with learning and memorizing the differences between these different pastries. Brain Co. was brought in to develop a software that could observe each pastry and identify it by sight so employees and staff didn't have to. Brain Co. responded by taking thousands upon thousands of pictures of different types of bread and pastries, comparing them to each other, and utilizing a neural network to differentiate and identify each type of bread. In 2013, they launched the Bakery Scan, a device that can look at bread, look at pastries, look at any assortment of baked goods, and identify it on the spot, saving time, money, and efficiency for any number of companies that would utilize it, while keeping the product's fresh aesthetic. This story doesn't end with bread, however. In 2017, a doctor at the Louis Pasteur Center for Medical Research in Kyoto, Japan, saw a television segment that featured the bakery scan. He realized that cancer cells, when looked at up close under a microscope, looked a little bit like bread. The doctor contacted Brain Co. and wondered if a similar software could be developed that would look at and identify cells instead of bread. Brain Co. already had the framework of observing and identifying data with the bakery scan. All they had to do was feed the software different data. In this case, cancer cells versus other types of cells. Much like the work for the bakery scan, Brain Co. used thousands upon thousands of sample pictures of cells to help the software properly detect cancer. The new device, called the Saito AI Scan, is being tested in several hospitals around Japan, and it apparently works with 99% accuracy. This just goes to show you how useful computer learning is. And it also goes to show you how clever people can be with something as innocuous as trying to distinguish one pastry from the other can end up being used in the same way to save lives. From Japan, we head to the Netherlands, where an equally unusual discovery is being studied. Dutch scientists are developing a new kind of rapid COVID-19 test using bees that have been trained to detect the virus. A company out of Wageningen University in the Netherlands called Insect Sense has announced that it's trained more than 150 bees to study and identify samples containing the virus that causes COVID-19 using the bees' sense of smell. As you may be aware, bees have an incredible sense of smell, which they use in their everyday lives to find flowers, which they can then take back to their hives. And this incredible talent has been used in studies like this before. In this particular study, bees were given a sugar water solution reward every time they were exposed to a sample infected with COVID-19. Using this reward system, the scientists trained the bees to extend their tongues every time they detected an infected sample. Because of the insect's hypersensitive smell, this test was able to train bees to detect COVID-19 in a matter of minutes. These scientists reported that this particular type of testing only scored a small number of false positives and false negatives and is otherwise incredibly accurate. Insect Sense is proud to report that it has developed a prototype machine that can train bees to detect the virus, and they hope to utilize this machine in low-income countries where access to materials for more expensive COVID tests are limited. Hey, animals are amazing, as we've discussed before, and scientists are amazing also. Let's head back over to the east, where scientists and researchers from Zhejiang University in China have created a flat-packed pasta that grows and gains a more traditional shape once it's in a pot of water. The team who developed this new type of pasta says that they were inspired by flat-packed furniture, and that the flat-packed noodles could reduce pasta packaging by up to 60%. Food waste as well as space usage is a huge problem for food manufacturers all over the world, and these scientists hope to develop a method that eliminates all airspace included in pasta packaging. Such a success could provide consumers with more pasta per purchase, and could have a drastic effect on food packaging waste. These scientists also claim that this flat pasta cooks faster than more traditional pasta, and it could possibly reduce cooking emissions. Furthermore, the researchers hope that their flat pasta can be employed on space missions where there is limited space to hold enough food to keep people alive for months at a time. I've got one more weird discovery for you before we get to the break, and this one involves robots, so I'm bringing us all the way back around, baby. A new study in Bochum, Germany finds that the touch of a humanoid robot makes people happier and more likely to follow the robotic requests. Researchers were responding to the touch starvation that happened to many people during the COVID-19 pandemic. This may or may not have happened to you, but the last year, it certainly separated a lot of us from each other. And some people were simply left without intimacy or any sort of touch or really any sort of hand-to-hand interaction from other people. If you are one of those people, I'm very sorry to hear that. It has been established that people who are touch-starved for a long time may experience a variety of negative physiological effects that can increase stress, depression, and anxiety, and that touch starvation can even have an impact on a person's immune system. Once again, if you are one of those people who is currently dealing with such trauma, you may or may not be pleased to find that a robot can simulate the touch that you may require to feel better. In this particular study, students were asked to engage with a robot called NAO, or NOW. This is a research robot that has been used for education and research in past studies. However, in this particular study, the robot would converse with the student, and every once in a while, it would spontaneously pat the back of the participant's hand. That's kind of creepy, if you ask me. However, the students that were part of this study would not agree with me, as most participants smiled and laughed when the robot patted them, and none were reported to pull away from the robot's touch. And even weirder, those who were touched by the robot were more likely to go along with the robots urging them to show interest in a particular academic course discussed during the conversation. I take that to mean that the robot would be like, hey, you should take a cooking class. And the student would go like, I don't think so. And then the robot would touch the student's hand and go, no, you should take a cooking class. And then the student was like, you know what, robot? You drive a hard bargain. You're pretty convincing there. After the reassuring conversation was completed, many of the students reported that they were in a better emotional state after the robot patted them on the hand. So apparently you could just be motivated by a robot who's programmed to encourage you. The scientists on this study hope to use their data to develop robots that can someday fulfill the role of therapists, personal trainers, and even life coaches. Would you let a robot be your life coach? I don't know how I feel about that. A robot doesn't have a life. It's just It's just a shell with a lot of computer data inside it. However, I'm really more of a trusting real people type of guy. Maybe a robot would be more consistent in its advice. I don't know how I feel about it. I would love to know how you feel about it. Go ahead and hit me up on social media at the GSMC Weird News Podcast Twitter and tell me if you'd let a robot be your therapist. I've been hearing an awful lot about robots taking over certain jobs like, car manufacturing or construction. Certainly haven't heard yet of a robot that's going to take away the job of a therapist. But heck, I guess if we have a robot that can identify bread and then later identify cancer cells, it's a weird new world that we're living in. And hey, every time you have to pick out traffic lights on Google before it'll let you into your email, just know that you are helping drive the future forward. I never thought things would be like this, man. We're getting closer and closer to the Jetsons. I guess, except we're not living above the clouds and we're not in flying cars. Some of us are in self-driving cars, though. So, we're getting closer and closer. I'm not super sure we'll ever be in flying cars. That sounds like a terrible idea. Like, just everybody flying around in a helicopter. Just doesn't sound like the right thing to do. Doesn't sound very safe. We would probably need self-driving flying cars. I think I could tolerate that, though that still scares me. And I don't necessarily want a robot or an artificial intelligence in charge of my well-being, in charge of my safety or my life. I know it happens anyway, but not so directly. Once again, I don't think a robot should be in charge of my mental health. So I definitely wouldn't want it in charge of my physical health. Who knows? Maybe I'm just an old fuddy-duddy. Maybe I'm not willing to accept the inevitable robot uprising. And if robots don't get to us, we're definitely going to have a Planet of the Apes situation because there's orangutans who can hide wire in their lips to escape their zoo enclosures. Regardless, we are entering a new era of science and weird discoveries, and I am so happy to share some of those today. When we get back, I'm really excited to talk to you about my 5 most awesome moms. And moms, I love you. Love when you're weird. Thanks for all you do. Hopefully you'll like this list. This is the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We'll be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your humble host, Mark Swan, and I've had so much fun with you guys today, going over some of my favorite topics of the week. We talked about bees, we talked about COVID, we talked about bread robots finding cancer cells. We talked about robots who can touch your hand and just make you feel a little bit better. We talked about Russian models escaping Chinese boy band reality TV shows. And hey, we lived, we laughed, and we learned all along the way. And I'm so glad to have shared these moments with you because that's where the real joy of being a podcast host is I just get to talk and you get to listen. And it's like we're friends. Anyway, moving on. Like I said at the top of the hour, I am recording this on Mother's Day, and this is a big shout out to all moms everywhere. You have a thankless job. you do something that I don't think I would be possible, or I don't think I would have the capability of doing. And I don't just mean giving birth, because I, physically can't do that. But I just mean taking care of any number of kids, teaching them to be human beings, loving them despite their flaws, their mistakes, loving them and teaching them no matter what little brats they can be. I know I had my moments as a child, and we won't get into it. However, for you moms, I dedicate this final segment to you. I went all across the web, and I found 5 incredible cases of awesome moms in honor of Mother's Day, and I would absolutely love to share them with you. So, on my top 5 list of awesome moms, we first go to Georgia in the year 1982, where I would like to share with you the story of Angela Cavallo. Angela was in her house while her son Tony was working beneath his 1964 Chevrolet Impala. She heard a slam and she ran into the garage to find that her son was trapped under the car. Apparently, when he was working on it, the bumper jack slipped out from underneath the vehicle and the car fell on him, knocking him out and pinning him down and threatening his life. So what did Angela do? Did she cry? Did she scream? Did she call for the police? Did she pass out? No. Angela grabbed at the side of the car and lifted it 4 inches off the ground. I have a feeling you may have heard of this story before. This is a case of something called hysterical strength, and moms are probably the most common people to utilize it, because something just kicks in when your kid is in trouble. And that's what happened to to Angela. Even if she was in her late 50s, she mustered the strength to lift the car and try and rescue her son. Now, Tony was knocked out, and so Angela called for any sort of help she could find. An 11-year-old neighbor named Johnny Edwards came to the rescue and went running down the street to see if he could find any other neighbors to help pull Tony out. 2 people were able to come and rescue Tony, and he was brought to the hospital, where he sustained no permanent injury. And it's all thanks to her totally radical mom and her wackadoo strength. So, Angela, cheers to you. That's why you get the number 5 spot on this list. The number 4 spot comes from my neck of the woods in Colorado. In 2016, a mother was surprised to hear her older of 2 sons screaming. She came outside to find that the younger brother was in the jaws of a mountain lion. The animal had apparently deemed the younger boy food and had pounced on him, apparently just absolutely tackling and starting to eat the boy. The mother, who will remain anonymous, charged the animal and yanked away one of its paws to discover her son's whole head was in the creature's mouth. In an act of incredible strength and heroism, the mother then pried the cat's jaws open and rescued her son. The boy was taken to the hospital where he survived, and the mom only sustained minor injuries. As for the cat, well, it was found soon after by police and killed, which, is sad. Maybe don't attack a little kid, especially when you have this warrior mom who's going to come take care of you. According to police, the cat was not fully grown, and that if it had been a full-size 110-pound lion, this would have meant a much different story. But come on, give some credit where it's due. That woman did some amazing work with no time to spare. I mean, fighting off a beast is no small task, and it just goes as a testament to a mother's love for her son. And to you, anonymous woman, we salute you for such bravery. Good for you. That is something only a mom could do. And keeping up with the theme of cats and moms, our number 3 spot takes us to Ireland for something a little bit different. A pair of farmers by the name of Ronan and Emma Lawley were looking after some newly hatched baby ducks when they realized that the ducklings had disappeared. They had feared the worst from their farm cat. A little lady named Della might be behind their disappearance. The couple feared for the worst as they called out and looked for their cat, and what they found surprised them. When they finally found Della, they saw that the cat was holding on to one of the ducklings with its head between her jaws. They scrambled at first to try and get the duck away from the cat, hoping that it hadn't killed the poor thing, but they soon realized that Della was not acting in a predatory manner. Instead, the cat was holding the duckling like it was one of her kittens. And in fact, Della had gathered the 3 ducklings to her nest where she had collected her own kittens. And there is a really cute picture of this right here. It is a cat sitting in a bed of hay, and there are 3 baby ducklings, and then there are 2 kittens, and they are all in a big ball of love and cuddles. Ronan and Emma thought the whole scene was cute, but they did feel the need to separate the cat from the ducks. I mean, they're different species of animals. But the ducks apparently had taken to Della, as once they were separated, they waddled right back to her, and the cat gathered them again and covered them with her paw. The baby birds nuzzled against her and attempted to nurse from the new mother cat. This is unusual and fascinating because ducks don't nurse. They don't give milk, so they wouldn't normally nurse milk from their mother. However, some sort of instinct kicked in, and they were able to actually nurse from Della. And Della, being an incredible mom, took to the ducklings as if they were her own. There's instincts all around, and when you have a baby that needs to be taken care of, and you are a cool mom, sometimes things just work out. Now, after all was said and done and the ducks began to grow a little bit, you would think that possibly Della would go, oh, wait, these are ducks. These aren't my children. Not so. The ducklings grew, and Della continued to take care of them and dote on them as if they were her children. There are pictures and videos of the entirely grown ducks, and they still love and hang around with their adoptive mom. So, Della the cat, for your incredible sense of empathy and kindness towards animals that aren't even in your same species group, I give you the number 3 spot. Number 2 takes us to Mozambique, of all places, in the year 2000. That fateful year, Mozambique had been suffering some of the worst flooding in its history, and a soon-to-be mother named Carolina had the misfortune of being caught in one of those floods during one of her walks. While the water rose to dangerous levels, Carolina was forced to find refuge in a tree to try and wait out the storm. Fate, of course, had different plans, as that's when Carolina started going into labor. Perhaps it was the trauma of the flood or the worry of being drowned or being carried away by the flood, or perhaps it's because fate has a cruel sense of humor, but Carolina's water broke and she was forced to sit in the tree and give birth to the baby. Carolina had no food or water, nor did she have a means to escape or any way to contact someone to come and rescue her. So, what did she do? She sat in the tree and she gave birth to her baby. Carolina says that she was feeling dizzy and was scared that she would fall into the waters and drown, and that she still has nightmares of losing her baby into the rivers running beneath her. Carolina was able to successfully give birth to her daughter, who she named Rosita, before the pair were rescued by helicopter. And then, in a positive twist of fate, the story reached the news circuit and Carolina and Rosita became somewhat of celebrities. After the exciting incident, Carolina and Rosita went on kind of a press tour around Europe and the United States, where they were actually able to raise awareness for the troubles of Mozambique and even raise money for her family and for the country itself. Carolina might have endured a traumatic incident in order to have her daughter. However, I think she will always remember this unique birth and that she will always treasure her daughter. So, Carolina, for giving birth to a baby in a tree while being pelted by rain, I give to you the number 2 spot of my top 5 most awesome moms. And you may be wondering yourself, Mark, who's number 1? We've gone through such an eclectic list here. We've had moms who lift cars. We have moms who fight off big cats. We have moms that are cats. And now we have a mom who gave birth in a tree. So who is my number one mom for this Mother's Day honorary list? Well, I feel like I would be disingenuous if I did not award the number one spot to my mom. Yes, I'm sure I can hear the eyes rolling in the audience, but I am a sap for these types of things. Because of COVID-19, I haven't been able to see my mom in over a year. We live a country apart, and I only get to visit once or twice a year. And so I've been missing her. I did not order her flowers this year, and I feel bad about that, but I do hope that I can gift to her some publicity. So, Mom, you are my number one. I love you very much, and I wish you a happy Mother's Day. This lady is incredible, always supportive, mother of 3 boys, my 2 older brothers, and myself, of course. Always supportive, big advocate for women's rights, women's health. She was a nurse for years and years and years, and she moved around the country with my Air Force dad. Always a pillar of strength, super smart, super kind. She is a big supporter of my efforts and the show, and she has always been supportive of whatever weird, wacky thing I have going on in my life. Even when I did rock and roll for 10 years, she listened to my album and sang along with all the swear words and everything. So for that, Mom, happy Mother's Day. You are my number one awesome mom of this list. And with that, I am happy to bring the GSMC Weird podcast to a close. I'm so happy that you could join me today while we talk about robots and moms and pop stars and bread and bees, man, bees. And hey, if you have any weird ideas for weird news stories, please, once again, hit us up on social media. I seriously love going on Twitter and posting on the GSMC Weird News podcast. There's always so many cool discussions going on. There's a lot of weird news outlets out there, and I am proud to be part of them. And also, once again, you can find a wide assortment of GSMC podcasts that cover a varying number of topics, and you might just find another podcast that will pique your interests. Maybe you are just a weird news guy, and that's fine, but maybe you want to hear somebody talk about cars. We've got that. Maybe you want to hear somebody's hot takes on music. We've got that. Please look us up. We are on all podcast apps, and we are more than happy to bring the news to you. And hey, hit me up on social media anyway, because I want to hear your top 5 awesome moms. Or I want to hear about your interactions with a therapist robot. I want to hear it all. So I'm going to close out the show wishing and hoping you have a weird and wonderful week, and I can't wait to hear from you. And once again, I'd like to thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And once again, I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you.